Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I am George. Today, I'm finally getting around to these guys. Some of you know what these are. That gun is going to give it away. I'll give you another hint. It's Eldar Guardians. Also, I may not understand what hints are. I've been hemming and hawing about this kit. I'm looking forward to painting it, except that I'm not looking forward to painting it because I really don't know what I want to do with it. I'm just going to bite the bullet. Iyanden. I'm going to go with Iyanden because I like the craft world's ethos, the whole a bunch of us are dead, so now the back have to come back and help us fight, which means a lot of dreadnoughts, a lot of those wraith constructs. Really cool idea. But yellow, man. I have to learn how to paint with yellow. I guess it's time. Here are the Guardians. It's a pretty good looking model kit. I did enjoy putting this together. It was a little finicky because these Eldar Guardians are pretty thin, kind of spindly, and so it takes a little bit of patience to put them together, especially these guys. Some of these guys they're in this running pose and they have 1 foot on the ground, so the surface area for contact with the base is fairly limited. So you need some patience when you glue this to the base. You have to leave it on there to your plastic cement sets and then don't even look at it for a while because it will tip over and you start all over again. There's also these little accessory pouches, they're like magazines, grenades, other pouches. That's kind of a fiddly bit as well. And getting the arms onto the torso can be kind of difficult as well. Most of these have the gun and one arm attached. Then you have to connect the arm to the gun and then both arms to the torsos. There's, I guess, a bit of a trick to it. You know, the way I found that worked the best for me was to connect the arm to the weapon, let it set for just a little bit, not completely. You want to have a little bit of give to that connection point. Once it sets a little bit, then I attach the arms to the torso. There's a little bit of fiddling and messing around to get them to look, to join in the right place. But once you get that figured out, it's okay. It's just a little tedious, but it's a good looking model. I'm really happy with the way these turned out. I went ahead and just added a few doodads to the base. I'm keeping them flat because I like to have the plastic model make contact with the plastic base. That's a much more solid contact than to super glue them, like say on a piece of terrain, whether it's a bit of cork or some wood. In this case, I use air dry clay. Super gluing plastic to some other kind of medium can be less than satisfying. So it limits my options in terms of adding elevation to my models, but it's a choice I'm willing to make because I do want maximum bonding between the model and the base. Having said all of that, the kit does include a number of options. So this squad, you could make this into a Storm Guardian squad. Like, so it has arms with pistols and it has a couple of melee weapons. So you have that option as well. I chose the Guardian Defenders, so they're the ones that are just, they're not meant for close combat. I think that's a better choice right now. At least that's what I've heard. The better choice than the Storm Guardians. Eldar Guardians just don't have enough of an oomph to get into close combat, so you want to really leverage their shuriken catapults in battle. Anyway, here's the plan. I, for whatever reason, have this. No, I know the reason. I decided that I want to go with Iyanden. That's the yellow and blue Craftworld. I went with that one because, well, there's a couple of reasons. One of them, I like the whole idea. So Iyanden is that Craftworld that has been so beaten and so beset by adversaries that they rely on their Wraith constructs more than other craft worlds, which means you're going to get a lot of Wraith Lords or whatever they're called, those big undead robot deals. I like that idea. I don't know why. It just sings to me. Having said that, I'm not a big fan of the color yellow, particularly painting the color yellow. I've tried a couple of times, and I haven't had a ton of success. But this time, I'm going to try it because all of my Eldar are going to be some variety of yellow. So the plan is to start off with a prime of skeleton bone. I'm using Army Painter primer. It's a pretty solid primer. It's consistent. It works well every time. It's reasonably priced. And it does a good job. I am not going to Zenithal highlight this group because I'm going to add the shadows and highlights myself. I'm not going to rely on the Zenithal Prime. I'm going to build up a number of different layers on the yellow to get the yellow to look good. It's not just a matter of Zenithal highlighting and then slapping on some yellow, because at least from my limited experience, yellow doesn't look good when you do it that way. You kind of have to do some other stuff. So once I prime them, I'm going to hit them with a brown. The brown's going to be the base coat, and it's going to be a reasonably, like a medium glaze. I'm not going to go thin glaze because I don't have a Zenithal highlight on these, so it's going to be a glaze of monster brown. It's a kind of a medium brown. That's going to be the undercoat for the yellow, which I'll layer on with this stuff. It's Citadel Colors Averland Sunset. I've never used it before. I bought it exclusively for this kit and really for this Eldar Craftworld. I am just not a fan of the Army Painter yellows that I have in my collection. I don't know for a fact that this is a better yellow, but I know those other ones don't work very well. They're very, very thin, have horrible coverage. I've not had a good experience with them. I don't know whether or not this will work. I've heard some people say they're not very good either, but I have to try something, right? So that I'm going to add this yellow over the monster brown as a dry brush, not as a glaze, not as a layer. It's going to be a dry brush. And I'm going to highlight that with this other Citadel color, yellow. It's Ural Yellow. It's a nice bright yellow. That should be the yellow that my Iyanden Craftworld Eldar really should represent. But these two colors will provide the shadows and the midtones and the highlight. That's what it's going to read like. So it's a bit of a departure from my usual painting style, but honestly, it's time. It's time for me to understand how to paint yellow, and let's give it a shot. Let's get priming. So I sort of chickened out on the plan. The original plan was to use a little monster brown for my initial base coat. This was going to be my undercoat to be applied over the primer, but I chickened out. I was afraid it was going to be too dark, and so, especially since I was going to do the base coat and then I was going to do a wash over that, I thought, no, it's going to be too dark, it's going to be too dark. So I didn't trust the plan, and I went with a kind of a heavy glaze of this stuff, Desert Yellow from Army Painter. It's kind of a yellow brown. I figured it would be a darker brown. It would be a darker yellow that I was going to use, and once I applied a wash over it, it was going to look nice and dark, and then I could add the next steps to bring it back up to yellow. I don't know if it was necessary, but as it turns out, I really liked the yellow. I kind of want that to be the yellow where we end up, which is a weird conundrum, but let's call it a happy accident. Had I not chickened out from the plan, I wouldn't have even tried the Desert Yellow, and it's a very nice, kind of unsaturated yellow. It's almost like a mustardy kind of a color. I think it works well for my purposes here, so, happy accident. I like it. Right after the first base coat was dry, I went ahead and applied my wash. I chose Army Painter's Mid Brown because I did want to darken up that yellow that's on the first base coat, but I didn't want to darken it too much, but it should have been darkened more than the soft tone could have done. I thought about using Citadel Colors Agrax Earthshade, but I decided to try this just to kind of see how it looked. I mean, I've been using the Earthshade a lot, so I want to be able to use both. They do different things, although the Army Painter product is a little thick and gloopy, so I did thin it down just a little bit. Added just a little bit of water and a little bit of flow improver just to kind of help it be a little more transparent and a little less gloopy, and it looks pretty good. I should point out there's a couple of areas on the model that don't have a base coat yet, and that's by design. The important part for me here was to establish the right color yellow, and I didn't want to add a bunch of other colors like the blue and the black for the weapon until I felt really comfortable with the yellow, and so I won't really know until a few more steps are added. So I'm going to leave that base coating for the blue and the black. I'm going to leave that until closer to the end. It's a little out of sequence for my normal type of painting, but I think in this case, since I'm experimenting and I'm learning, I think that's a good approach. That way, if something goes horribly wrong and I have to strip the models, I didn't spend a ton of time on those other parts. So, something to think about. You can do them in a different order, but for me, I think, at least for this project, it's the way it needs to be. So I want to take stock before I move on to this next phase, because it's an important phase, but I just want to say that I'm at that phase in the painting process where I'm probably the happiest with the way it looks. Obviously, there's some paint missing on the helmet, there's some paint missing on the gun, etc., but the model itself looks pretty good to me. And inevitably, things go south from here. I'm going to do my best to make sure that doesn't happen here, but there's just something about the model after it's got its base coat and its wash. It just looks so good to me. It's as close to perfection as I can, I don't know, as I can imagine. So let's ruin it with this next step, which is dry brushing. So to continue to refine essentially the base coat, right, the primary armor color, I'm going to move on to some dry brushing. And I'm going to do it in 2 layers. I'm going to do 1 layer to establish, essentially, well, re-establish the mid-tone. And I'm going to do that with Citadel Colors Uriel Yellow. It's a nice bright yellow, but it's not pale. It's a rich yellow. I really like, well, I like the bottle. And applying it onto the model, it gives it a nice amount of warmth that I wasn't expecting. And it really does complement the original base coat. And it's a nice process. I gave it a fairly generous dry brush, but I didn't want to interfere with too much of the shadow, but I did want to kind of make sure that it reads as yellow as opposed to brown. The result of this first layer of dry brushing is a really nice warm yellow. It's kind of like a yellow with brown, like a burnt mustard. I like the effect. I did a second application of dry brush, and basically this was to establish some highlights without going about and fussing around with edge highlighting and stuff. I used Army Painter's Demonic Yellow. It's a pretty bright yellow, and I wanted it to kind of sit on top of the other dry brush. So it was a much more sparse dry brush than the original one with the Uriel Yellow. So basically it goes on anything that's yellow, but really only at the top surfaces and some of the edges. Very, very sparse, just a little bit of highlight to give some depth to the model. Moving on to the detailing phase, and technically this could be the detailing phase, but it could also be kind of an iteration of the base coating, washing kind of a phase. It depends. On this model, since there's really not a ton of the secondary colors or the accent color, I'm just going to call it detailing. So the first thing I'm going to hit is the weapon. I'm going to go with black, but I'm not going to use just black. I'm going to use my normal black recipe, which is a medium glaze of Necromancer Cloak by Army Painter. I put a decent coat on the weapon itself. There's the tubing that connects to the shuriken catapult, and a lot of them have like pouches or magazines. Anything that's metallic in that magazine, like anything that's metallic on those accessory packs, like magazines, grenades, I'll use the same black recipe, which in this case again is the Necromancer Cloak Glaze. When that dries up, I hit it with some dark tone from Army Painter. It's one of their shades. I thin this down just a little bit so that it doesn't get too gloopy or sticky, but it'll do a nice job of tinting the gray to make it look black. Once that's dry, I hit that with a very light dry brush of silver metallic paint to make it look like a black metal gun. It's a pretty nice look. For the secondary color, the blue for the Iyanden Craftworld, I'm having trouble pronouncing that. I'm going to go with an undercoat, a base coat of Deep Blue by Army Painter. This is going to be a glaze. This will be kind of the dark area for my model. I'll hit that with a wash of blue tone to make sure it pools. There's not a ton of places for the wash to pool because there's relatively little pieces of it, so I'm just going to use this for the helmet and just a couple of little accent parts here and there on the model. Once they wash dries, I'm going to do a very light dry brush of crystal blue. This is just going to serve as my highlights, so the pooled blue tone will be my shadows, the deep blue will be my midtones, and the crystal blue will serve as my highlights. The details for this model, they're kind of sparse, and I like that approach. I did pick out, there is a little armband on the left arm of these Eldar Guardians. I picked that out in white. I like the contrast between the white and the yellow armor. I think that looks pretty neat, although it's kind of a hidden detail. Maybe you pick it out, maybe you don't. Maybe you pick a brighter color like a red. Whatever. On the back side of the model, I also made sure to include a little bit of blue. So there's kind of some power conduits on the power pack and some other little details like that. Not a lot, just enough so that when you see the model from behind, you see a splash of the blue that you otherwise wouldn't get. The other detail that I wanted to include was the weapon. I wanted to tie the weapon in to the rest of the armor. So before the detailing phase, it was just kind of a metallic black. So I went in and added a yellow stripe and just a few of the bumps on the shuriken catapult. I made them the blue, and I added a little filigree of yellow on the magazine, just to kind of make it part of the rest of the model. The last two details, there's some little kind of intakes on the kind of the collar of the armor of these guardians. I made sure to dot them in black so that you couldn't see inside them. I think that was a nice little touch. And finally, obviously, the red dots for the eyes. I think they turned out pretty neat. At long last, my Eldar Guardian Defenders are complete. It took me a while. It took my time with these. Not necessarily painting. I just took a lot of little breaks. So it took me a bit, but they're done. And I have to say, I'm really happy with the results. That is not to say that these are really, really well painted. They're not, but they're kind of up there at the kind of upper limits of my typical painting outcomes. And I think part of it is that I was really, really afraid of yellow armor. But as it turns out, it wasn't as hard as I was expecting. Certainly it helped that I did some research and I looked at to see how other people did yellow armor well, and I learned from them all. So the scheme that I used in this case seems to work out pretty well. I know I had intended to do something a bit more radical so that the shadows were a bit darker. Didn't feel up to it, but maybe in another project. I still have a ton of other Guardians I can paint, so maybe I'll try my hand at them then. Overall, I think this was a really cool little project. I really like these models. They're really cool looking. They're pretty similar to the last edition of the Eldar Guardians. So I'm not exactly sure what the differences are. I don't have kind of the latest iteration of them. There do seem to be kind of relatively few mold lines. So if that's all the improvement they made, I'm all for it. I know I skimped on the coverage of how I decided and painted the details, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I tend to skimp out on those because, well, A, they're really hard to capture on camera, for me anyway. My setup is a little, amateurish, and so that becomes kind of a problem. After all, nobody wants to see a bunch of out-of-focus shots of me going, yeah. Nobody wants to see that. Additionally, I am trying to keep the video length down a bit, so doing a decent job of painting and explaining all the detailing it would go against that goal. To be quite honest, I'm not sure that the detailing is the most important part of any painting project, at least not for beginners or intermediate level painters. I think I fall somewhere in between the beginner and intermediate level. And so for someone like me and someone perhaps like you, if this is kind of where you're gauging your skill level, it's way more important to get the basic armor colors down. The details, yeah, they're important, but you can have really nice details over a crummy looking base, and it's not going to help. Yeah. So I focus on the really important stuff and kind of skimp over the stuff that's a little less important, but also that I'm weaker at. Finally, there's a lot of idiosyncrasy on how to do the detailing. You know, what color pouch do you want to use? What color is going to be? What color is a weapon? How are you going to detail this jewel or whatever? And the color choices you make, they are really up to you, and depending on the kind of the theme you're going for, and how many different colors you're comfortable using. There's a whole lot of variability, so it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time on that sort of thing. I will say that I struggled a bit with the detailing on the weapon. I wanted to do something to kind of incorporate the weapon's look, to make it kind of look part of the rest of the model. And it looks okay, but I could have done I don't know, I feel like I could have done something different, something more dramatic, and maybe I could have painted the weapon that blue color. I think maybe that would have worked a little better. This metallic color, it looks cool, but the yellows and the blues on the jewels, they don't really stand out, they don't pop, so maybe that's something that change for my next project. The basing scheme, I kept it relatively simple. I wanted to be quick and easy and still look decent, and I think I achieved that with a little bit of air-dried clay pressed over a decent looking texture, some grit, some sand, a few tufts, and a decent little paint job. So that's all there was to my Eldar Guardians. I have learned not to be afraid of yellow armor. It's not as hard as it could be, but there's plenty of experimenting left to do with this color. It's interesting, it's vibrant, but it doesn't have to be blindingly so. I hope you learned a little bit, and I hope you have the courage to undertake a challenging color for your armor. If the theme you're going for, or the craft world, or the faction that you're going for calls for some color that you're not quite comfortable, there's plenty of resources out there on YouTube land to help you do a decent job. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace!